As always, it's a pleasure to be with you tonight and to have another opportunity to read a little bit more of God's Word together. And as we glean and find application throughout these precious words. We're going to talk about tonight, obviously, you see behind me, vengeance and justice. And in the song we just sang, I kind of wish we would talk about justice first, because that's a little bit more of something that we can all really stand in awe of how just our God is. But it doesn't just have to do with justice, being that our God is also a God of vengeance, of pure vengeance. That He's the only one in creation, in existence, that can perform vengeance, to avenge, and actually do it right. He's the only one that can do that. And I was thinking about this in the small auditorium class. We've been studying Romans 12 and Romans 13. And those are passages that we'll read as we go through this. Very important to deal with these concepts. But even in between of thinking of this week, as many of you have probably seen on the news about the man in India, that he was in a situation, I believe this week or last week, where he found out that his daughter had been raped. And she was pregnant with the man who raped her baby. And so, instead of, seeking justice, going to the authorities, this man decides to take it into his own hands. He lures the man that raped his daughter into his house and eventually tortures him to death. And now, currently, he's been arrested for murder. And he's going to have to await trial for the things that he has done. And in thinking about this thing, you see on the news, a lot of people are debating, did he do right? Was this justice? What was this vengeance? What was this action? What do we label this as? And a lot of people just don't know what to say. So hopefully through God's Word, if we are ever, Lord forbid, in this situation, we will know how to approach and handle this situation. If any of us ever get into a situation as terrible as this guy's situation is, a lot of times our first reaction is to tell Jesus to get in the back seat, and we just let our emotions control our decisions from there on out. And understandably, why? You build up so much wrath, something's going to happen. But we need to be prepared, so if we are ever in the situation, we know how to tell our wrath to get out of here, and that we're going to let Jesus handle this situation. And this is what we're going to be kind of looking at. Matthew 10:28, and do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. This is all about fearing God, fearing the one that actually can bring vengeance, and fearing the one that actually can bring true justice. To start this off, I wanted to give you a definition of the difference between vengeance and justice. And the definition I'm going to give you is not perfect. It's very hard to find a perfect definition to show the difference of these two things. For instance, justice is not, in a sense, just what we would picture as justice in this sermon. Justice can also mean fairness. Justice can also mean righteousness. We could say things like frontier justice or vigilante justice. And then justice actually means vengeance. There's too many different ways you can look at it. So I'm going to give you two that I found in a book that maybe will get us on the right track, but it's not perfect. Vengeance, a repayment against evil empowered by emotion. So the sense is someone does something evil to you, so you repay them because of your anger or your wrath. You repay them that evil because of what they did to you. Here, justice, a repayment against evil again, but it is empowered by authority. That what you have here is that someone does something to you, but you have an authority figure that does the repayment. Not because they have a personal attachment, not because of an emotion, but because they have the authority to enact that repayment. Now, as I said, this is not perfect at all, by all means. When we read Romans 12 and Romans 13, he's going to start off talking about vengeance in Romans 12, but then he says that to the government God has given authority, but he's going to use the word avenge instead of justice there in Romans 13. So you're going to see this is not going to be a perfect definition. The words flip-flop. But this will get you in the right idea of where we're going. Now, this is a perfect definition of these two things. Vengeance and justice both belong to God. That's the one thing we can actually be sure of. 3 times in the Bible, God says, vengeance is mine. I will repay. This originally in Deuteronomy, and then Romans and Hebrews both quoted again. Vengeance belongs to God. Justice belongs to God. He is a God of light, he is a God of love, and he is a God of justice. Both of these things belong to God. Also, both are a repayment against evil. It has to be a repayment. And I want to bring and blow this point up and look at this, a repayment, and this is what I mean by this. We have three different places in the New Testament where we see a word like repayment talking about vengeance. Or even, I could say too, even about justice. And as we look at these three things, I believe you'll see the harmony of the epistles. 1 Peter 3:9, Peter writes, not returning evil for evil, reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing there, returning, not a repayment. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. And this is in Romans, and we'll read this in full in just a minute. There's actually the word repay. And here this time using the word renders. 1 Thessalonians 5:15. See that no one renders evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good, both for yourselves and for all. And I believe here we all get the point. Do not repay evil for evil. Someone does evil to you, do not repay them in that same manner. Render there just means to give back. It's just a different way of saying it. And the reason why, for this just one point here, I want to focus on repayment. Because throughout tonight, this is something that I do not want to talk about. I do not want to talk about defense. The term that we use is self-defense. Before I make this point, you need to understand that there's a lot of Christians, a lot of brethren out there that I really respect that will not agree with me with what I'm about to say. But I believe that there is a difference between repaying evil and stopping evil. I believe there's a difference. We use the classic example that Jesus uses of someone slapping someone on the face. If someone slaps you on the face, and then you even have the time to turn the other cheek, but instead you slap them back, you are repaying because of what has just happened to you. You let your emotions take over, and you repay that evil. Now, if someone jumps on top of you and continues over and over again to slap you onto the face, to the point of you don't even have a chance to turn the other cheek, and you kick them off of you, I don't believe that's a repayment. I believe that's something different. I believe that's stopping the evil, not repaying the evil. It wouldn't do into the idea of defense. And we can bump it up to a grade higher. Someone comes in and breaks in your house. Some Christians do believe you should just allow them to do that. I don't see it that way. I believe you're allowed to stop that person from doing the evil they're doing. Now, if someone breaks into your house, steals your things, and leaves, and the crime is over, and you go and hunt them down and murder them, well, that's vengeance. That is what we are talking about tonight. So I do not want to have the self-defense debate. And this is the way I see it. And I want to move on from this point. But we do understand that vengeance and justice both are, in fact, a repayment of what evil has done. Vengeance. And let's turn to Romans 12 if you haven't already. And we'll read 17 through 21 here. And we're going to kind of use this passage as a core to explain these thoughts. Verse 17. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in doing so, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. To glean from this passage, number one, we've already stated this, I believe, 4 times, but vengeance belongs to God. That means, in even simpler terms, that it does not belong to you or me. It belongs to God. We read all this passage about not repaying evil for evil. We don't repay anything. Who repays? God says, I will repay. I will take care of this. And even, again, if many of you are reading out of different versions, the King James Version says it a little different. But to give place to his wrath there in verse 19, you have the situation where you are allowing the Lord's wrath to take care of this. And I take this to meaning as he takes it personally. If someone dumbs up and does evil to you, God takes that personally. He becomes angry from someone doing evil to you. And you can have some confidence and courage in that God is overwatching this, and he sees evil done. He says, I will repay. I will take care of that. And the point of this passage is to let him take care of that, not try to get in the way. It's a simple concept, but it's something that I don't believe we do often enough. Instead of allowing him to repay, to do his job that he wants to do, we conform to the world. Of course, God does not want us or need us in a help in taking vengeance, but the world tells us something different. Verse 2 of Romans 12, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and you may prove what is good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. I know that when someone comes up and does something evil to me, my first reaction, sadly, is not to forgive and forget. My first reaction is not just to let it go. Instead, for some reason, I begin to plot. How am I going to get this person back? Whether it's too big or too small, I'm going to try to give this person back. And I have to read passages like Romans 2 to remind myself, I don't need to be a part of this. I just need to get over it and do something else. And I believe the reason why we have this reaction, believe it or not, I believe it's the movies. And I think about it more and more throughout these couple of weeks. Almost every movie we watch is a revenge plot. Almost every single one. And of course, all movies, we need to be careful what we watch already as it is. We need to watch every movie we watch with a biblical filter. But Satan is spoon-feeding us revenge. Every plot's the same. Bad guy comes in. Bad guy does something bad to the good guy. And the good guy makes a plan, and the good guy enacts his vengeance upon the bad guy into the movie happy ending. That's how every movie is. One of the perfect examples for this, and some of you may know of this book, some of you may don't. But in 1844, Alexandre Dumas, probably not saying his name right, wrote a book called The Count of Monte Cristo. In the book of The Count of Monte Cristo, he originally wrote The Three Musketeers. That's where some of us would know of his name. But in The Count of Monte Cristo is a fictional story based off of Romans 12. That's what I believe is his inspiration for this book. You have a story about a man named Edmond Dantes that is thrown in prison by his friends for something he didn't do. These people plan and they scheme against Edmond and they get him thrown in prison, and he's completely innocent. So throughout the book, he escapes from the prison, he educates himself, he gains all this wealth, and he becomes the Count of Monte Cristo. Now he knows what he should do is take his education and take his wealth and go out and live a good life. But instead, he decides he needs to repay. He needs vengeance. So throughout the rest of the book, he enacts vengeance against each person that did him harm. And the end of the book is Romans 12. He realizes he should not have done it because in the end of the book, he is miserable. Nothing good came from it. He realized he did wrong by not letting God handle it. Hollywood finds out about this book and they want to make a movie. So guess what's the part that they change? Same story. He enacts his vengeance, but there's a happy ending. He gets the girl he wants. He still has all his resources. He still has this good life. And even though he says at the end, I probably shouldn't have done it, we have the nice little sunset in the closing scene. Vengeance is good in everything we see. Yet we know not to conform to the world. And not only do we not have the authority to do this, and even though Satan is spoon-feeding us this little bit of vengeance, God wants us to realize that every time we try to take vengeance in our own hands, we just make things worse. Always. We will always make things just worse. And I think this is the reason why he says in verse 21, do not be overcome by evil. You go and take vengeance in your own hands, you will be overcome by evil. In Proverbs 20:22, I'll read it or you can turn there with me. 24:28. Proverbs, do not be a witness against your neighbor without cause, for would you deceive with your lips? Do not say, I will do to him just as he's done to me. I will render to a man according to his work. Solomon says here, you want to take vengeance against your neighbor? Guess what you have to do to take vengeance against your neighbor? You have to lie. You have to bear false witness. And he attributes vengeance with sinning more and more to enact this vengeance. And we can look at the man in India as well. Instead of being home now and taking care of his daughter, he's in prison. And as they were saying that the court system there takes to 7 to 8 years, he may sit in prison for 7 to 8 years. Or for even if he gets out, he's going to have to worry for the next 7 to 8 years of what's going to happen to him, what's going to happen to his family. No matter what you do, if you try to go down this path, you will just make things worse. Only God can do it correctly. So allow God to do it correctly. He will repay. If you turn back to Romans 13, if you turn with me to Proverbs, what God has done is he's realized and he knows that sometimes it may not be beneficial to wait till Judgment Day to enact his vengeance. There's going to be times when that's the only thing he is going to do. He will enact his vengeance when Jesus comes back and separates his from those that are not his. So what he has done is on this earth he has created a minister. And this minister is the government. And this is what Romans 13 is talking about. So here in 12, he's just said not to repay evil, that he will repay. Chapter 13, verse 1, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid. And he does not bear the sword in vain, but he is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore you must be subject, not only to the wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, and honor to whom honor. I believe that Paul's main point here, actually, to the Romans is to pay your taxes. I think this was actually his main point. But through this, we glean these different thoughts of how to handle these situations. God, in verse 1, gave the government authority for our protection. You don't want to live in a world without government. And there's people that are my age, and I think my generation is to blame, that thinks that we can live in a world without government. That's going to be a terrible world that I hope I never see. The reason why we have these two big windows on the other end, and the reason why we still feel safe, even though those windows probably could be easily broken, is because of the government and the fear and the respect that they command. No one's going to come and break those windows because they know they'll have to answer to the state of Alabama, or they'll have to answer to the United States of America. Government is a good thing, even though that sometimes is so hard to see. God put them there for a reason. They are, in verse 4, his ministers. They work for him. God rules in the nation of men. They have the right to bear the sword. They are an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. This is their purpose. This is what they do. They see evil, so they go and they're supposed to go take care of that evil so we can live in somewhat of a safe environment. So, verse 5, these are my applications from these points. We should be subject, but also we should allow them to minister to us. This is their purpose. This is their reason for existence. If you're in a situation that is an emergency, a situation where someone has done you a great evil, and you believe they need to be stopped out in the world, call 911 and tell them what they have done. That is what they are there for. And maybe I'll get up on a little bit of a soapbox. But if someone does something to you and they threaten you and tell you that if you go and tell the police that they're going to kill you or kill your family, whatever threat they can think of, don't fall for it. Let God's ministers take care of it. The reason why these criminals threaten the way they do is because they know that if someone tells, they will receive justice. That's what they're scared of. And that's why they try everything in their power for you not to tell God's ministers. Trying very hard. Don't fall for that. Let the ministers work for you. That is their purpose. Well, that's exactly the way we should see it. And again, Romans 13 is another simple concept. That we understand that God takes vengeance, but also he has allowed these avengers to take vengeance here on this earth for his purpose. Now, the million-dollar question, but what if? And I believe that every time God hears his people say, but what if, he probably rolls his eyes. Or maybe he sighs, or maybe he just shakes his head. But God, what if? He hears this way too much. But here, the but what if in this situation, but what if the justice system is corrupt? And I believe as many were debating about the man in India situation, this was their reasoning behind this, is that that man who raped his daughter would have never seen any type of punishment because their court system is so slow. That it would take 8 to 7 years to see anything happen. And I can understand why that would be such a big problem. The state of Alabama isn't much better. I was talking to a judge 2 weeks ago, and he was telling me how underfunded our court system is. And that's why it takes 2 to 3 years in the state of Alabama to have a trial. Not only is it underfunded, but it is Alabama's greatest revenue source. They make more money off the court system than they make anywhere else. So you can understand why, potentially and probably, the system's corrupt. And we say, God, I need to enact vengeance. I can't wait for your ministers. And of course, I can't wait till Judgment Day. I just need to go ahead and take care of this now. And we have that frontier justice. So what if the justice system is corrupt? Well, number one, of course it's corrupt. It's made up of men. There's no question if it's corrupt or not. It may be God's ministers, but it's ran by us. We're going to corrupt it. And guess what? When Paul was writing Romans 13 during the Roman period, the Roman system was corrupt. And from here on out, every government system will be corrupt. Does that change Romans 13? Does that give us the right to be disobedient? Of course not. Paul knew it was corrupt. Now let's look here at Acts 23. I just want to briefly look at Paul's hardships when he was having to deal with the court system. When he was in a situation where he wasn't going to get justice for the things that he was accused of doing. Acts 23, end of the third missionary journey, Paul's in Jerusalem. He's in the temple, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees that have been after him since day one are trying to accuse him of bringing Gentiles into the temple. So he is arrested. They try to beat him. He says, no, I'm a Roman, just in time. They can't beat him. So now he's going to appear before the council, the chief priests, Ananias. Chapter 23, verse 1. Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? And those who stood by said, do you revile God's high priest? And Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of your ruler of your people. And of course, this is just the beginning of where Paul's problem starts. He sees this man, and all he says is I've been living in good conscience. I don't believe I've done anything wrong. And he commands to get struck across the face. So Paul, probably conforming to the world in this situation, naturally responds, well, God's going to strike you. But even saying that, Paul realizes what he did and apologizes and repents of it immediately, realizing that he has the authority. It doesn't matter if the system's corrupt. He's still obeying the commands that he gave us as an apostle. And I put this little dash here in chapter 23 because it doesn't end in chapter 23. This is the rest of the book, isn't it? He appears before Felix. He waits in prison for 2 years because Felix is wanting a bribe to release Paul. Eventually Festus comes into power. Festus looks at him, tries to deal with him. King Agrippa comes and even realizes that Paul's innocent, but Paul appeals to Caesar instead, so he ends up getting shipped off to Rome. The system's corrupt. Paul knows it, yet he still wrote and still endorses Romans 13. And of course, Paul knew it was corrupt, but let's talk about the big one. Jesus knows it's corrupt. Now, obviously, besides being God of the universe, how does Jesus know it is corrupt? Because the day that Jesus died is the day that the court system absolutely failed. We put an innocent man to death. Everything about Jesus' court case was illegal. Everything about it. It was held at night. And when the council was originally supposed to sleep over the judgment ruling, instead they hurried it up along, probably hoping to make sure that Jesus did not prevent his execution. They got him up to Pilate. Pilate even knows he's innocent, even says out loud, I have found no fault in this man. But because he wants to please the crowd, goes ahead and kills him anyway. The justice system is corrupt. But what does 1 Peter 2:21 say? 1 Peter 2:21 says that Jesus gave us an example of what to do in this situation. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who when he reviled did not revile in return, when he suffered he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. Another version says, to him who judges justly. So what if the system is corrupt? Why don't we commit ourselves to him who judges justly? In this whole situation, and I know emotions flare when we're in these difficult situations, but when does everyone just stop and say, why aren't we just trusting in God? Why don't we just obey to the best of our ability, and we will commit ourselves to him who is the final judge, the one who is the God of justice? Why don't we trust in him? No one ever gives that option. Yet that is the solution to just about every problem you will face on this earth. Just like Jesus is the example, you commit ourselves to him who judges justly. And I basically just say amen and go sit down there right there. But I want to talk a little bit more about justice. But we understand here that God has ministers, and we will obey them and be subject to them as long as all those laws, those commands are in subject to the will of God. And we will trust in God through no matter what situation we're in, and never try to take vengeance in our own hands. As 2 Peter says, he's the judge of justice. God is justice. Let me give you 3 passages to show you how God is justice. Isaiah 30:18. Therefore the Lord will wait that he may be gracious to you, and therefore he will be exalted, that he may have mercy on you. For the Lord is the God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him. Psalms 37:27. Depart from evil and do good, and dwell forevermore, for the Lord loves justice and does not forsake his saints. They were preserved forever, but the descendants of the wicked shall be cut off. Proverbs 20:22. Do not say, I will recompense evil. Wait for the Lord, and he will save you. God is a God of justice. And to look at these 3 passages here, besides the idea that God is justice, what's another theme that you see in these passages? I believe it's this: to wait on the Lord. Therefore, the Lord will wait. He waits on us, so therefore, we should wait for him. Wait for him to enact his justice, to bring us justice. Psalms 37, we see that God does not forsake his saints. God does not forget about his saints. You know, if someone does you evil, God will repay them, but he will repay them in his own time. He will not forget about you. He just has a way of doing it. Proverbs 20:22, wait for the Lord. And what's the thing that happens because you wait for the Lord? And you will be saved. Justice has to come for waiting. In any situation we're in, whether we have to deal with the court system, whether someone just slaps us across the face, God will take care of it. All he asks from us is to allow him to take care of it and to wait on him. Be patient. And as we go through this, and hopefully if you've been able to follow with me through this process, I think you will realize how simple this all is. It's God's. Wait on him to do it. That's all there is to it. That's it. And if we can understand this concept, I believe if we're ever in a situation that would want us to act vengeance, we would have nothing to worry about because we will trust in him who judges justly. Proverbs 20:22. This whole idea, if you wait on the Lord, he will save you. Of course, you have a situation that when Jesus comes back, and I believe Mr. Terry read this verse, this passage that tells us this, that when Jesus comes back, he will enact vengeance. That's something that he's planning on doing. And everyone, because God is just, will get what they deserve, except for those that have been saved through his blood. Those of us that have sought after God's forgiveness will not get what we deserve. Instead, we will get something that we don't deserve, which of course is a paradise with him for an eternity. If you realize that you're going to get what you deserve on Judgment Day, if you know that, you need to take care of that tonight. Because for all we know, the judge will be here in the next couple of minutes. We have no idea. So if you need to take care of that, if there's any way we can assist you, please come forward.